Staff Sergeant Rachel Morrison thought the worst part of her medical discharge would be leaving her unit behind. She was wrong. The worst part was when 3 doctors went dead silent after seeing what was carved into her spine, something she never knew existed, something that made them exchange glances and quietly escort her to a windowless room where they asked questions she couldn't answer. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Rachel sat on the examination table, her service records spread across the doctor's desk like evidence at a crime scene. Fort Braxton Medical Center had seen thousands of soldiers pass through its doors, but Dr. Elena Vasquez had never encountered a case quite like this one. Rachel's injury seemed straightforward enough on paper. An IED explosion in Syria had thrown her against a concrete barrier, fracturing 2 vertebrae and leaving her with chronic pain that ended her 12-year military career. What should have been routine medical processing for disability benefits had turned into something far more complicated. "We'll need to do a complete spinal examination," Dr. Vasquez explained, pulling on latex gloves. "The VA requires detailed documentation of all injuries and any pre-existing conditions." Rachel had been through countless medical exams during her service. This felt no different from the dozens of others: sterile, impersonal, necessary. She changed into the hospital gown and positioned herself as directed, her back exposed to the cool air of the examination room. Dr. Vasquez began her assessment methodically, checking range of motion, testing reflexes, and documenting the obvious signs of trauma around Rachel's lower lumbar region. The fractures had healed well, though they'd left their mark in scar tissue and persistent stiffness. But then the doctor's hands stopped moving. "Nurse Patterson, could you come here for a moment?" Dr. Vasquez's voice carried a note Rachel had never heard from a medical professional before, uncertainty mixed with something that might have been alarming. Nurse Patterson, a middle-aged woman who'd been working military medicine for over 20 years, approached the examination table. Rachel felt the slight pressure of fingers tracing something along her upper spine, between her shoulder blades. "Have you ever had any surgical procedures on your back, Sergeant Morrison?" Dr. Vasquez asked. "Just the emergency surgery after the IED. Why?" Rachel tried to turn her head to see what they were looking at, but the nurse gently guided her to remain still. The 2 medical professionals exchanged a look that Rachel couldn't see but somehow felt. There was a long pause before Dr. Vasquez spoke again. "We need to bring in a specialist. Please remain here while we consult with another physician." Rachel heard the door close behind them, leaving her alone in the examination room, wearing nothing but a paper gown and growing confusion. Through the thin walls, she could make out muffled voices, urgent, hushed conversation punctuated by what sounded like phone calls. 20 minutes passed before the door opened again. This time, Dr. Vasquez returned with 2 additional doctors Rachel didn't recognize. One was an older man in a white coat with a colonel's insignia, the other a woman in civilian clothes carrying a tablet and wearing an expression that suggested this wasn't her first time dealing with unusual cases. "Sergeant Morrison, I'm Colonel Hendricks, Chief of Staff here at Fort Braxton. This is Dr. Sarah Chen from the Defense Health Agency. We'd like to ask you some questions about your medical history." Rachel felt her stomach tighten. In 12 years of service, she'd learned that when high-ranking officers showed up unexpectedly, it usually meant trouble. "We've discovered some markings on your back that don't appear in any of your medical records," Dr. Chen said, positioning herself where Rachel could see her tablet screen. "Can you tell us about any medical procedures you might have had as a child? Any hospitalizations, surgeries, or treatments you might not remember clearly?" "I had my appendix out when I was 8, Rachel replied, her mind racing. "Broken arm when I was 12. That's about it for anything serious." "Why? What kind of markings?" The doctors exchanged glances again. Colonel Hendricks cleared his throat. "There appears to be what looks like a brand or tattoo high on your spine. It's quite small but very precise. The design includes symbols that," he paused, "that are causing some concern." "A brand? That's impossible. I would know if someone had branded me." Dr. Chen held up her tablet, angling it so Rachel could see the screen. The image showed a section of skin with what appeared to be a small, intricate design burned or carved into the flesh. The symbols were geometric, angular, unlike anything Rachel had ever seen. "This is your back, Sergeant Morrison. The image was taken during today's examination. The scarring suggests this was done many years ago, likely when you were quite young." Rachel stared at the screen, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The design was roughly the size of a quarter, positioned between her shoulder blades where she would never be able to see it herself. "I've never seen this before in my life," she whispered. "We believe you," Connell Hendricks said. "The placement and the apparent age of the scarring suggest this was done without your knowledge, probably when you were unconscious for medical treatment." "But the only time I was ever unconscious for surgery was—" Rachel's voice trailed off as the implications hit her. "Your appendectomy," Dr. Chen finished. "We've already requested your medical records from Riverside Children's Hospital in Ohio. The surgeon who performed your operation was Dr. Marcus Steinberg." Rachel remembered Dr. Steinberg vaguely, a tall man with kind eyes who had reassured her frightened parents that the surgery was routine. She remembered waking up with a small scar on her lower abdomen and spending 3 days recovering in the pediatric ward. "What aren't you telling me?" Rachel asked, noting the careful way the doctors were phrasing their words.
Colonel Hendricks pulled up a chair beside the examination table. "Dr. Steinberg left Riverside Hospital abruptly 6 months after your surgery. There was an investigation into certain irregularities in his patient files. The investigation was classified and then sealed." "We've seen similar markings before, Sergeant Morrison," Dr. Chen added quietly. "In our database, there are 17 other cases of service members with identical or nearly identical brands in the same location. All of them had childhood surgeries performed by physicians who later came under investigation." Rachel felt the room spinning slightly. What kind of investigation? "We can't discuss the details here," Colonel Hendricks said, "but we need to ask for your cooperation in helping us understand what happened to you. There may be others." The weight of their words settled over Rachel like a heavy blanket. She had joined the military to serve her country, to be part of something larger than herself. She had never imagined that something larger might have claimed her first, years before she was old enough to understand what was happening. "What do the symbols mean?" she asked. Dr. Chen hesitated before answering. "We're not entirely certain yet. But based on our analysis of similar cases, we believe they represent some form of identification system, a way to mark and track certain individuals." "Track for what?" The silence that followed was answer enough. 3 days later, Rachel found herself in a conference room deep within the Pentagon, a place she never imagined her medical discharge would lead her. The room had no windows and only one entrance, guarded by 2 MPs who had escorted her through a maze of corridors she was certain she'd never be able to navigate alone. Across from her sat Agent Victoria Cross from the Defense Intelligence Agency, a woman whose poker face rivaled those of the best intelligence operatives Rachel had encountered overseas. Next to Agent Cross sat Dr. Benjamin Torres, a forensic pathologist whose credentials included work with both the FBI and CDC on cases involving human experimentation. "Before we begin, Sergeant Morrison, I need you to understand that everything discussed in this room is classified at the highest levels," Agent Cross began, sliding a thick non-disclosure agreement across the polished table. "Your cooperation is voluntary, but the information you're about to receive concerns national security." Rachel signed the documents without hesitation. After 3 sleepless nights wondering what had been done to her 8-year-old body, she needed answers more than she needed legal protection. Dr. Torres opened a laptop and turned it toward Rachel. The screen displayed a detailed 3D model of the symbols found on her back, each line and curve magnified and analyzed with scientific precision. "We've run this pattern through every database we have access to," he explained. "Linguistic analysis, archaeological records, religious symbology, occult references, even corporate logos and patent filings. The design doesn't match anything in recorded human history." "So it was created specifically for this purpose?" Rachel said. "That's our working theory. But here's where it gets more complex." Dr. Torres pulled up a new screen showing a map of the United States dotted with red markers. "These represent the locations where we've identified similar brands. The distribution isn't random. Rachel studied the map. The markers clustered around major medical centers, but there was a clear pattern favoring certain regions: the Midwest, parts of the South, and several locations in the Pacific Northwest.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. All rural areas with limited oversight, Agent Cross noted. Places where a pediatric surgeon could operate without extensive peer review or administrative scrutiny. How many victims are we talking about? Rachel asked. 43 confirmed cases among military personnel alone, but we suspect the actual number is much higher. Dr. Torres switched to a timeline graphic. The earliest case we've documented occurred in 1987. The most recent was in 2019. Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. 32 years! This has been going on for 32 years! At minimum, we believe the program may have started earlier, but service members from before 1987 either haven't been discovered yet or didn't survive to report it. Agent Cross leaned forward. Dr. Marcus Steinberg, the surgeon who operated on you, is part of a network we've been tracking for the past 18 months. After he left Riverside Children's Hospital, he moved to 3 different facilities over the next decade. Each time, he left abruptly following mysterious patient complications or administrative reviews. Where is he now? Dead. Apparent suicide in 2018, though the circumstances were suspicious enough to warrant a federal investigation. He left behind encrypted files on a secure server that took our tech team 14 months to crack. Dr. Torres pulled up what appeared to be medical records, but the format was unlike anything Rachel had seen. Instead of standard patient information, the files contained detailed psychological profiles, genetic markers, and something labeled as compatibility ratings. Steinberg and others like him weren't just branding children randomly, Dr. Torres explained. They were selecting candidates based on very specific criteria: high intelligence scores, particular physical characteristics, specific genetic markers that indicated resistance to certain types of psychological manipulation. You're saying we were chosen? Recruited might be a better word. For what, we're still trying to determine. Agent Cross opened a separate folder and spread several photographs across the table. Each showed a different person in military uniform. Men and women of various ages and backgrounds, all looking confident and capable. These are some of the other branded individuals we've identified. What do you notice about them? Rachel examined the photos carefully. They're all in specialized roles: special forces, intelligence, communications, psychological operations. Exactly. Not one of them ended up in a standard infantry or support role. Every single branded individual we found has gravitated toward positions requiring high security clearances and specialized training. Where is he now? Dead. Apparent suicide in 2018, though the circumstances were suspicious enough to warrant a federal investigation. He left behind encrypted files on a secure server that took our tech team 14 months to crack. Dr. Torres pulled up what appeared to be medical records, but the format was unlike anything Rachel had seen. Instead of standard patient information, the files contained detailed psychological profiles, genetic markers, and something labeled as compatibility ratings. Steinberg and others like him weren't just branding children randomly, Dr. Torres explained. They were selecting candidates based on very specific criteria: high intelligence scores, particular physical characteristics, specific genetic markers that indicated resistance to certain types of psychological manipulation. You're saying we were chosen? Recruited might be a better word. For what, we're still trying to determine. Agent Cross opened a separate folder and spread several photographs across the table. Each showed a different person in military uniform. Men and women of various ages and backgrounds, all looking confident and capable. These are some of the other branded individuals we've identified. What do you notice about them? Rachel examined the photos carefully. They're all in specialized roles: special forces, intelligence, communications, psychological operations. Exactly. Not one of them ended up in a standard infantry or support role. Every single branded individual we found has gravitated toward positions requiring high security clearances and specialized training. The implications were staggering. Rachel thought about her own career path, how she'd been recruited for psychological operations despite initially signing up for logistics, how doors had seemed to open for her that remained closed for others, how she'd always felt driven toward challenges that tested both her mental and physical limits. You think we were programmed somehow? We think you were prepared, Dr. Torres corrected. The branding appears to be just the beginning. What we've discovered in Steinberg's files suggests a multi-stage process that continues well into your military careers. Agent Cross pulled out a thick manila envelope. Tell me about Captain James Riley. The name hit Rachel like a physical blow. Captain Riley had been her commanding officer during her first deployment to Afghanistan, a man whose guidance had shaped her entire approach to military service. She'd respected him more than any other officer she'd served under. How do you know about Captain Riley? He has a brand identical to yours, and according to his service record, he specifically requested you for his unit based on what he called psychological compatibility assessments that don't appear in any official Army database. Rachel's hands began to tremble slightly. That's impossible. Captain Riley saved my life in Afghanistan. He's the reason I made it through my first combat deployment. We're not suggesting Captain Riley was acting with malicious intent. Based on our investigation, we believe the branded individuals were designed to work together, to form natural bonds and trust relationships that would make them more effective in critical operations. Dr. Torres opened his laptop again and showed Rachel a complex flowchart that looked like a family tree, but instead of blood relations, it showed command structures and unit assignments spanning 2 decades. Every branded individual we've identified has served under or alongside at least 3 other branded individuals during their career. The probability of this happening by chance is essentially 0. You're saying our entire military service was orchestrated? To some degree, yes, but not by the military itself. This appears to be the work of a private organization with extensive resources and long-term strategic goals. What is he now? Steinberg's files reference something called the Meridian Project. From what we've been able to piece together, it's a decades-long effort to place specifically conditioned individuals in key positions throughout the military, intelligence community, and civilian government. Conditioned how? We're still working on that. The branding appears to be just an identification marker. The real conditioning seems to have occurred through a series of psychological interventions disguised as routine medical care, educational programs, and even recreational activities throughout your childhood and adolescence.
Rachel thought back to her youth, trying to identify anything unusual. There had been a summer camp she'd attended for 3 consecutive years, a program for gifted students that had seemed almost too good to be true. The counselors had been unusually interested in psychological testing and had conducted regular medical checkups that went far beyond the standard camp requirements. Camp Wilderness in Michigan, she said suddenly. 3 summers, ages 10 through 12. They said it was for academically gifted children. But now that I think about it, the selection process was incredibly rigorous for a summer camp. Agent Cross made a note. We'll look into that. What do you remember about the camp activities? Normal camp stuff mostly. Swimming, hiking, arts and crafts. But there were also these sessions they called leadership development, where we'd do problem-solving exercises and psychological assessments. At the time, I thought it was just an advanced education program. Did you maintain contact with other campers after you left? Rachel paused, considering. Actually, yes. Several of us ended up at the same high school, even though we lived in different districts. And later, some of the same people showed up at various points in my military career. Dr. Torres leaned back in his chair. Sergeant Morrison, we believe you and the other branded individuals represent a multi-generational experiment in human conditioning and placement. Someone has invested enormous resources in creating a network of highly capable, psychologically compatible individuals and positioning them throughout the military and intelligence apparatus. For what purpose? That's what we need to find out,
Because based on the timeline we've developed, whatever this has all been building toward, it's happening soon. Agent Cross closed her files and looked directly at Rachel. We need your help to identify other branded individuals and piece together the full scope of this operation. But I have to warn you, several people who've gotten too close to the truth about the Meridian Project have died under suspicious circumstances. Rachel felt a familiar calm settle over her, the same feeling she'd experienced before dangerous missions overseas. What do you need me to do? We want you to reach out to your former colleagues, particularly those you served with under Captain Riley. See if any of them have experienced unusual medical situations or unexplained gaps in their childhood memories. But be careful how you approach this. We have reason to believe some of the branded individuals may not know what they are, while others might be actively working to protect the project. You think some of them are still under control? We think some of them never stopped being under control. The question is whether that control is conscious or subconscious, willing or unwilling. Dr. Torres handed Rachel a secure phone. This device is encrypted and untraceable. Use it to contact us if you discover anything or if you feel you're in danger. And Sergeant Morrison, trust no one from your past until we know more about how deep this goes. As Rachel prepared to leave the windowless conference room, Agent Cross added one final warning. The people behind the Meridian Project have been planning this for over 30 decades. They've had time to prepare for the possibility that their network would eventually be discovered. Whatever happens next, they'll be ready for it. Rachel pocketed the secure phone and walked toward the door, her mind already racing through the list of people she needed to contact. But as she reached for the handle, one more question occurred to her. Agent Cross, how did you first discover this network existed? The agent's expression grew darker. One of the branded individuals contacted us 18 months ago. He claimed to have broken free from some kind of psychological conditioning and wanted to expose the entire operation. What happened to him? He was found dead in his apartment 3 days later, apparent suicide. But before he died, he managed to upload Steinberg's encrypted files to a secure server. Everything we know started with his sacrifice. Rachel felt a chill as she realized the full danger of what she was walking into. Someone had died to expose this conspiracy, and now she was being asked to continue his work. Rachel's first contact was Sergeant First Class Michael Harrison, a communications specialist she'd served with during 2 deployments. They'd maintained sporadic contact since her medical discharge, exchanging holiday cards and the occasional text about mutual friends. Now, sitting in a coffee shop in downtown Denver, she was about to test whether their friendship could survive what she was about to reveal. "You look like hell, Morrison," Harrison said as he slid into the booth across from her. "Retirement treating you that badly?" Rachel managed a weak smile. "Something like that. Mike, I need to ask you about something, and I need you to promise me you'll hear me out before you decide I've lost my mind." Harrison's expression shifted from casual concern to focused attention, the same look he'd worn when receiving critical intelligence briefings in the field. "What's going on? When's the last time you had a complete medical examination?" "About 6 months ago for my annual physical." "Why? Did they examine your back, your spine specifically?" Harrison's eyebrows furrowed. "Yeah, actually they did. Said they needed to document an old scar I didn't know I had, between my shoulder blades. The weird thing is, I have no memory of getting injured there." Rachel felt her pulse quicken. What did the scar look like? Small, maybe the size of a quarter. Strange pattern or something. The doc said it looked like an old burn or brand, but that seemed crazy because I would remember something like that. "Mike, I have the exact same mark in the exact same place." Harrison stared at her for a long moment. That's impossible." Rachel pulled out her phone and showed him the photograph Dr. Chen had taken at Fort Braxton. Harrison's face went pale as he recognized the identical pattern.
What the hell is this, Rachel? Over the next hour, Rachel carefully explained everything she learned about the Meridian Project, watching Harrison's expressions cycle through disbelief, anger, and finally a kind of hollow acceptance. When she finished, he sat in silence for several minutes. "Camp Wilderness," he said finally. "You were there too?" 3 summers,
ages 9 through 11. My parents thought it was this amazing opportunity for gifted kids." Harrison rubbed his forehead. "Jesus Christ, Rachel. Those psychological evaluations, the leadership exercises, even the way they grouped us into teams, it was all part of this, wasn't it?" "It looks that way. Mike, I need you to think carefully. Who else from our unit might have similar marks? Anyone who mentioned unexplained scars or childhood surgeries they couldn't remember?" Harrison pulled out his own phone and scrolled through his contacts. "Torres, not the doctor from your briefing, but Staff Sergeant Elena Torres from our Signal Intelligence team. She mentioned something about a weird scar during our last deployment, said the medic noticed it during a routine check, and asked her about the surgical history she didn't have. Can you reach out to her?" "I can try, but Rachel, this is going to sound insane. How do I even start this conversation?" Rachel handed him a business card with only a phone number printed on it. "Tell her you've discovered something about childhood medical procedures that might affect her security clearance. If she has the mark, that should be enough to get her attention." Harrison pocketed the card. "What about you? What's your next move?" "I'm going to Michigan. The camp records might have survived, and I need to find out who was really running that place." 3 days later, Rachel stood in front of a chain-link fence surrounding what had once been Camp Wilderness. The buildings were still there, but clearly abandoned, with broken windows and vegetation growing through cracks in the walkways. A rusted sign by the entrance indicated the property was owned by Meridian Holdings LLC, a name that made Rachel's stomach clench. She'd done her research during the drive north. Meridian Holdings was a shell company with connections to defense contractors, pharmaceutical companies, and several organizations involved in psychological research during the Cold War. The company had no public presence, no website, and, according to business records, no employees. Rachel cut through the fence and made her way to the main administrative building. The door was locked, but her military training had taught her more than just combat skills. Inside, she found filing cabinets that had been left behind, most of them empty, but a few still containing fragments of documents. What she discovered in those dusty files changed everything she thought she knew about her childhood. The documents revealed that Camp Wilderness hadn't been selected for academic giftedness at all. Instead, they'd been screening for specific psychological profiles, children who scored high on measures of leadership potential, stress resistance, and something called authority acceptance parameters. Even more disturbing, the files contained detailed medical information about each camper, including genetic markers and family psychological histories that should have been impossible for a summer camp to obtain. But it was a folder labeled Phase 2 candidates that made Rachel's hands shake as she read. The folder contained photographs and psychological profiles of 23 children, including herself and Harrison. Next to each photo was a detailed plan for integration pathways, specific recommendations for high schools, college programs, and ultimately military occupational specialties that would best serve the project's goals. Her entire life had been mapped out when she was 11 years old. The sound of a vehicle approaching outside interrupted her investigation. Rachel quickly photographed the most relevant documents with her phone and slipped out a back window just as a black SUV pulled up to the main building. From her hiding spot in the woods, she watched 2 men in business suits emerge from the vehicle. They moved with the purposeful efficiency of federal agents, but something about their behavior felt wrong. Real investigators would have come in marked vehicles with proper documentation. These men were conducting an unauthorized search. One of them spoke into a radio. "Perimeter is secure. Beginning cleanup protocol." Rachel realized with growing alarm that they weren't there to investigate. They were there to destroy evidence. She watched as they entered the building carrying what appeared to be industrial-strength shredders and several containers of what might have been acid or other chemicals for document destruction. Her secure phone buzzed with an incoming call from Agent Cross. "Morrison, where are you right now?" Cross's voice carried an urgency that made Rachel's pulse spike. "Michigan, at the campsite. There are people here destroying evidence." Get out of there immediately. We've lost contact with Harrison, and Torres never responded to his message. Someone leaked information about our investigation. Rachel felt ice in her veins. What do you mean, lost contact? Harrison missed a scheduled check-in 12 hours ago. His apartment shows signs of a struggle, but nobody. Rachel, the Meridian Project knows we're onto them, and they're cleaning up loose ends. From her position in the woods, Rachel watched the two men carry boxes of shredded documents to their SUV. Whatever evidence had been stored in that building was being systematically destroyed. I got some photos of files before they arrived, documents showing how they planned our entire lives from childhood. Those photos might be the only evidence we have left. Listen to me carefully. Do not go home, do not contact any friends or family, and do not use any credit cards or phones except the one I gave you. There's a safe house in Grand Rapids. I'll text you the address.
As Rachel prepared to retreat deeper into the woods, she heard one of the men speaking on his radio again. Subject tracking indicates Morrison was here recently. Thermal signatures show movement in the northeast quadrant. They weren't just destroying evidence, they were hunting her. Rachel moved as quietly as possible through the forest, using skills she'd learned during survival training to mask her trail. But as she reached what she thought was a safe distance, she realized the true scope of what she was facing. The two men weren't alone. Through the trees, she could see at least 4 other vehicles positioned around the camp perimeter, and she could hear the distant sound of what might have been a helicopter approaching. This wasn't a simple cleanup operation. This was a military-style extraction mission. Her phone buzzed with a text from Agent Cross. Safe house compromised. New location, Riverside Children's Hospital, Ohio. Meet Dr. Janet Kellerman in the archives at midnight. She has information about Steinberg. Rachel stared at the message, her training telling her this felt wrong. Why would Agent Cross direct her to the very hospital where her nightmare had begun? And why meet at midnight in a location that would be closed to the public? But as the sound of the helicopter grew closer, she realized she didn't have many options. She needed allies, and right now, Agent Cross was the only person who seemed to understand what they were facing. What Rachel didn't know was that 100 miles away, Agent Cross was sitting in a basement room with her hands zip-tied behind her back, watching a man in an expensive suit scroll through the messages on her confiscated phone. "Your asset is quite resourceful," the man said without looking up. "Dr. Kellerman will be pleased to finally meet her again." "Morrison will see through this," Cross replied. "She's too well trained to walk into an obvious trap." The man smiled coldly. "Agent Cross, you clearly don't understand the level of conditioning these subjects received. Morrison isn't just going into this trap, she's going to feel compelled to walk into it. That's what makes Phase 3 so elegant." Phase 3? The phase where our assets begin eliminating anyone who threatens the project, including federal agents who've gotten too curious about our work. Morrison will kill you herself and never understand why she felt she had to do it. Cross felt a chill as she realized the true horrifying scope of the Meridian Project. They hadn't just been conditioning soldiers to be more effective warriors. They'd been creating sleeper agents who could be activated to eliminate threats to the program, including the very people trying to help them. Meanwhile, Rachel had made it to her car and was driving south toward Ohio, unaware that with each mile she traveled, dormant psychological triggers implanted decades ago were slowly beginning to activate. The headaches had started an hour into the drive, followed by a strange sense of clarity about what she needed to do. She needed to reach the hospital, she needed to meet Dr. Kellerman, and she needed to eliminate anyone who stood in the way of her mission. What that mission was, she couldn't quite remember, but she knew it was important, she knew it was necessary, and she knew she would do whatever it took to complete it. As Rachel drove through the darkening Ohio countryside, the man in the expensive suit made one final phone call. "Dr. Kellerman, she's coming home. Activate Protocol 7 and prepare the termination chamber. After 30 years, it's time to close the Morrison file permanently."
Riverside Children's Hospital at midnight looked like something from a horror movie. Most of the building was dark, except for scattered security lights that cast long shadows through empty corridors. Rachel had parked 3 blocks away and approached on foot, every instinct screaming this was wrong, yet something deeper compelled her forward. The headaches had intensified during the final hour of her drive, accompanied by flashes of memories that didn't quite fit together. She remembered being wheeled into an operating room at age 8, but now she could recall additional details that had never been there before. A second room after the appendectomy, different doctors, procedures that had nothing to do with her appendectomy. The hospital's main entrance was locked, but the loading dock she'd been directed to stood slightly ajar. As Rachel approached, she noticed her hands were trembling, though she felt strangely calm. Her military training told her to retreat, to call for backup, to approach with extreme caution. But something else, something that felt like muscle memory, guided her through the doorway and into the darkened corridors. The archives were located in the basement, down a series of hallways that seemed familiar despite the fact that she'd never seen them before. With each step, more suppressed memories surfaced, being led through these same corridors as a child, though she'd thought she'd never left the pediatric ward during her recovery. Dr. Janet Kellerman was waiting for her in a room filled with medical files stretching back decades. She was an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes that seemed to recognize Rachel immediately. "Hello, Rachel. You've grown into exactly what we hoped you would become." Rachel's hand instinctively moved toward the concealed pistol she'd been carrying since leaving the Pentagon, but her arm felt sluggish, as if moving through thick liquid. "You're part of this," Rachel said, though the words came out slower than she intended. "I've been part of this since before you were born, my dear. I helped design the psychological frameworks that shaped your development. I was there when Dr. Steinberg performed your secondary procedure, and I've been monitoring your progress ever since." Dr. Kellerman moved to a filing cabinet and withdrew a thick folder labeled with Rachel's name and a series of numbers that meant nothing to her. "The beautiful thing about our process is that subjects retain no conscious memory of their conditioning. To you, your military career felt like a series of personal choices. Your attraction to psychological operations, your natural leadership abilities, even your relationship with Captain Riley, all carefully orchestrated results of programming that began when you were 8. "Programming for what?" Rachel tried to focus, but the room seemed to be tilting slightly. "Initially, we were developing enhanced soldiers for deep cover operations. The branded individuals were designed to be our perfect assets, loyal, capable, and completely unaware of their true purpose. But as the project evolved, we realized we'd created something even more valuable." Dr. Kellerman opened the folder and showed Rachel a series of psychological evaluation forms spanning 25 years, documenting every major decision in her life with clinical precision. "We discovered that our conditioned subjects could be activated for specific missions long after their initial training. With the right triggers, we could override their conscious mind and access deeply embedded command protocols." Rachel felt a wave of nausea as she realized what was happening. "You're activating me now." "Protocol 7, yes, though I prefer to think of it as helping you remember your true purpose. Agent Cross has been asking too many questions, getting too close to exposing our work. She represents a threat that must be eliminated." As Dr. Kellerman spoke, Rachel became aware of footsteps in the hallway outside. Someone was approaching, but her conditioned mind identified the sound as an opportunity rather than a potential rescue. "Cross is here," Dr. Kellerman confirmed, checking her watch. She was told this was where she could find evidence that would expose the Meridian Project. In reality, this is where her investigation ends. The door opened and Agent Cross entered, flanked by 2 armed men who were clearly not federal agents. Cross's hands were bound, and there was a fresh bruise on her left cheek, but her eyes were alert and focused on Rachel. "Rachel, whatever you're feeling right now, it's not real. They've done something to your mind." Dr. Kellerman smiled. "Agent Cross meets Subject 7 Alpha. Rachel Morrison ceased to exist the moment she walked into this building. What you're looking at now is a precisely programmed intelligence asset operating under direct command protocol. Rachel felt herself standing, though she hadn't consciously decided to move. Her hand was reaching for her weapon, and while part of her mind screamed in protest, a deeper part felt the rightness of what she was about to do. Cross has discovered classified information about a national security project, her own voice said, though the words seemed to come from somewhere else. Elimination is necessary to protect operational security. Rachel, listen to me, Cross said urgently. They killed Harrison. They've killed dozens of other branded individuals who started to remember what was done to them. You're not a soldier anymore. You're a victim, just like the others. But even as Cross spoke, Rachel was drawing her weapon with smooth, practiced motions. The rational part of her mind watched in horror as her body performed actions she wasn't choosing to make. Dr. Kellerman nodded approvingly. 25 years of conditioning, and it still works perfectly. Subject 7 Alpha, eliminate the target. Rachel raised her pistol, her aim steady despite the internal war raging in her consciousness. Cross looked directly into her, and Rachel saw something there that penetrated through the programming: recognition, understanding, and forgiveness. I know this isn't you, Rachel, but if you're still in there somewhere, you need to know that Harrison isn't dead. We faked his disappearance to protect him. He's safe, and he's working with a team of deprogrammed subjects who've broken free from their conditioning. The words hit Rachel like a physical blow. Harrison was alive. The grief she'd been carrying for his apparent death suddenly lifted, and for a moment the psychological controls wavered. Dr. Kellerman noticed the hesitation immediately. Subject 7 Alpha, complete your mission. Agent Cross is lying to disrupt your operational parameters. But Cross pressed on. Rachel, the secure phone I gave you, it wasn't just for communication. Every time you used it, it was recording biometric data and playing subsonic audio designed to reinforce your programming. I'm not the real Agent Cross. My name is Dr. Lisa Martinez, and I'm a psychiatrist who's been working with the other survivors. The revelation sent shockwaves through Rachel's conditioned mind. If Cross, Martinez, was telling the truth, then everything about her recent mission had been orchestrated to bring her to this moment. The real Agent Cross died 6 months ago, the same week that Harrison supposedly committed suicide, along with 3 other branded individuals who were getting too close to the truth. I took her identity to continue the investigation and to try to save as many of you as possible. Dr. Kellerman's expression had shifted from confident control to concerned calculation. Subject 7 Alpha, your target is attempting to corrupt your mission programming. Eliminate her immediately. Rachel felt the compulsion to fire growing stronger, but Martinez's words had created cracks in the psychological architecture that had controlled her for decades. She was caught between 2 competing sets of imperatives: the deep conditioning that demanded she complete her mission, and the emerging awareness that the mission itself was wrong. Dr. Kellerman, Martinez said, turning toward the elderly woman, you should know that Subject 7 Alpha isn't the only branded individual we've been working with. Subject 12 Beta is positioned outside this building right now. Through the small basement window, the distinctive red dot of a laser sight appeared on Dr. Kellerman's chest. That's impossible, Dr. Kellerman said, but for the first time, her voice carried uncertainty. Captain Riley sends his regards, Martinez replied, along with a message that the other 17 surviving subjects are ready to testify before Congress about the Meridian Project. Your 30-year experiment is over. The laser sight moved slightly, and Dr. Kellerman stepped backward toward the filing cabinets. The subjects can't break free from their conditioning. It's psychologically impossible. Not impossible, just extremely difficult and dangerous. 3 subjects died during the deprogramming process, but the others survived. They remember everything now. The surgeries, the camps, the psychological manipulation, all of it. Rachel felt the weapon in her hand growing heavier as her conscious mind began to reassert control. The compulsion to kill Martinez was still there, but it no longer felt inevitable.
Dr. Kellerman, Martinez said, turning toward the elderly woman, you should know that Subject 7 Alpha isn't the only branded individual we've been working with. Subject 12 Beta is positioned outside this building right now. Through the small basement window, the distinctive red dot of a laser sight appeared on Dr. Kellerman's chest. That's impossible, Dr. Kellerman said, but for the first time, her voice carried uncertainty. Captain Riley sends his regards, Martinez replied, along with a message that the other 17 surviving subjects are ready to testify before Congress about the Meridian Project. Your 30-year experiment is over. The laser sight moved slightly, and Dr. Kellerman stepped backward toward the filing cabinets. The subjects can't break free from their conditioning. It's psychologically impossible. Not impossible, just extremely difficult and dangerous. 3 subjects died during the deprogramming process, but the others survived. They remember everything now. The surgeries, the camps, the psychological manipulation, all of it. Rachel felt the weapon in her hand growing heavier as her conscious mind began to reassert control. The compulsion to kill Martinez was still there, but it no longer felt inevitable. The trigger phrases, the subsonic conditioning, the embedded command structures, we've learned how to neutralize all of it, Martinez explained. But the process requires the subject to want to be free more than they want to complete their programming. Dr. Kellerman moved toward what appeared to be an emergency alarm system on the wall. Security protocol requires that compromised subjects be terminated immediately. Subject 7 Alpha, if you cannot complete your primary mission, activate self-termination sequence Omega. The words hit Rachel's mind like a sledgehammer. New programming emerged from the deepest levels of her conditioning. Instructions to end her own life rather than allow her operational secrets to be compromised. Her hand began turning the weapon toward herself with the same mechanical precision she'd shown when aiming at Martinez. "Rachel, fight it!" Martinez shouted. "Remember who you were before they got to you. Remember why you joined the military. Remember the people you've saved. Remember that your life belongs to you, not to them." But the self-termination protocol was stronger than the mission programming. Rachel could feel her finger tightening on the trigger as the weapon moved toward her own temple. Outside, the laser sight shifted to the window itself. A single shot shattered the glass, and Captain Riley's voice echoed through the basement from a tactical radio. "Subject 7 Alpha, this is Command Override. You are ordered to stand down and await extraction. Your mission parameters have been updated. Your new primary objective is survival." The familiar authority in Riley's voice created a conflict in Rachel's programming. She'd been conditioned to follow his orders without question, but the self-termination protocol carried higher priority than standard mission commands. Martinez grabbed a heavy medical textbook from a nearby shelf and threw it at Dr. Kellerman, who had reached the alarm system. The impact knocked the elderly woman off balance, buying precious seconds. "Rachel," Martinez said urgently, "they programmed you to obey authority figures, but they made one critical mistake. They never programmed you to stop thinking. You're still a soldier, and soldiers protect innocent people. Look around this room. Look at all these files. How many children's lives have been destroyed by this project?" Rachel's eyes swept across the archives, seeing hundreds of folders with names and photographs of children who'd been subjected to the same conditioning she'd received. Some folders were marked with red stamps, terminated, deceased, or missing. The weight of their suffering broke through the final barriers in her mind. The self-termination programming wavered as her natural protective instincts overwhelmed the artificial commands. "Dr. Kellerman," Rachel said, her voice finally her own again, "you're under arrest for crimes against humanity." But Dr. Kellerman had managed to reach the alarm, and the sudden blaring of sirens filled the basement. Emergency lights began flashing, and Rachel could hear the sound of vehicles approaching the hospital at high speed. "The cleanup team will be here in less than 5 minutes," Dr. Kellerman said with renewed confidence.
Even if you've broken free from your conditioning, you'll never make it out of this building alive. The sound of tactical vehicles surrounding the hospital sent Rachel's training into overdrive. Through the basement window, she could see black SUVs taking positions at every exit, their occupants moving with military precision. These weren't ordinary security personnel. They were operators, the kind of people who made problems disappear permanently. "Martinez, how many exits does this place have?" Martinez asked, her mind now fully her own but operating on pure survival instinct. "3 main exits plus the loading dock we came through, but they'll have them all covered by now." Martinez was gathering files from the archive, stuffing the most critical documents into a medical bag. "There's a tunnel system that connects to the old psychiatric wing, but it was sealed off 15 years ago." Dr. Kellerman laughed despite her precarious situation. "You still don't understand what you're dealing with. The Meridian Project isn't just some rogue operation. It has support at the highest levels of government. Even if you escape tonight, where will you go? Who will you trust?" Rachel heard footsteps on the stairs leading to the basement. Multiple sets, moving in coordinated formation. Professional soldiers following standard building clearing procedures. "Riley, what's your status?" she spoke into Martinez's radio. "East Side is crawling with hostiles. I count at least 12 operators, possibly more." "Rachel, they're not here to capture anyone. This is a termination mission." Martinez pulled out what appeared to be a small explosive device from her medical bag. "Emergency protocols. If we can't get out with the evidence, at least we can destroy what's left of their archives." "Wait," Rachel said, studying the basement layout. "Kellerman, where exactly is the sealed tunnel entrance?" "I'm not telling you anything else." Rachel grabbed the elderly woman by the shoulders. "Doctor, I've spent the last 25 years believing I was serving my country. You stole that from me, and you stole it from hundreds of other kids. The least you can do is help us make sure this ends tonight." The footsteps were getting closer. Rachel could hear voices coordinating search patterns in the hallway above. Professional soldiers following standard building clearing procedures. "Riley, what's your status?" she spoke into Martinez's radio. "East Side is crawling with hostiles. I count at least 12 operators, possibly more." "Rachel, they're not here to capture anyone. This is a termination mission." Martinez pulled out what appeared to be a small explosive device from her medical bag. "Emergency protocols. If we can't get out with the evidence, at least we can destroy what's left of their archives." "Wait," Rachel said, studying the basement layout. "Kellerman, where exactly is the sealed tunnel entrance?" "I'm not telling you anything else." Rachel grabbed the elderly woman by the shoulders. "Doctor, I've spent the last 25 years believing I was serving my country. You stole that from me, and you stole it from hundreds of other kids. The least you can do is help us make sure this ends tonight." The footsteps were getting closer. Rachel could hear voices coordinating search patterns in the hallway above. Dr. Kellerman's resistance finally cracked. Behind the old pharmaceutical storage unit, the entrance was bricked over, but the wall is only single layer. Rachel located the storage unit, a massive metal cabinet that hadn't been moved in years. With Martinez's help, she managed to shift it enough to reveal the bricked-up entrance behind it. The mortar was old and crumbling, and several of the bricks were already loose. "Riley, we need a distraction, something to draw them away from the basement." "Copy that. Give me 30 seconds."
The explosion that followed shook the entire building. Car alarms began wailing in the parking lot, and Rachel could hear shouting as the tactical team responded to what sounded like a vehicle detonating near the main entrance. Using the noise as cover, Rachel and Martinez kicked at the loose bricks until they created an opening large enough to crawl through. The tunnel beyond was dark and filled with stale air, but it was their only chance. "What about her?" Martinez asked, nodding toward Dr. Kellerman. Rachel looked at the woman who had orchestrated decades of psychological abuse against children. Every instinct told her to leave Kellerman for the cleanup team, but that would make her no better than the people who had created this nightmare. "She comes with us. The world needs what she has to say." They dragged the protesting doctor through the tunnel opening just as flashlight beams began sweeping the basement behind them. The tunnel was narrow and partially collapsed in several places, forcing them to crawl on their hands and knees through sections filled with debris and standing water. "This connects to the old psychiatric wing," Dr. Kellerman said, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "But that building has been abandoned for 20 years. There's no guarantee the exit will be accessible." As they made their way through the darkness, Martinez explained what had really happened over the past 18 months. The whistleblower who first exposed the Meridian Project wasn't killed for his information. He was killed because he'd figured out how to reverse the conditioning. His name was Dr. Alan Foster, and he was one of the original researchers who helped design the psychological frameworks. Rachel paused in her crawling. One of the creators turned against the project? Foster had a crisis of conscience when he realized the scope of what they were doing to children. He spent 5 years developing deprogramming techniques in secret, testing them on himself first. He'd been subjected to experimental conditioning during the early phases of the project. They reached a section where the tunnel opened into a larger space, what appeared to be an underground storage area beneath the psychiatric wing. Emergency lighting along the walls provided dim illumination, and Rachel could see that the space was filled with abandoned medical equipment covered in dust and decay. Foster managed to successfully deprogram 3 subjects before Meridian discovered what he was doing. But before they killed him, he transmitted his research to a network of psychiatrists and former intelligence officers who'd been investigating human experimentation programs. How many people are involved in this resistance? More than you might think. Foster's techniques have now been used to free 23 branded individuals, though the process is dangerous. 6 subjects died during deprogramming attempts. Their conditioning was so deep that breaking free caused complete psychological collapse. Dr. Kellerman had been listening to this conversation with growing agitation. "You have no idea what you're interfering with. The Meridian Project saved this country from threats you can't even imagine. The subjects we created have protected terrorist attacks, eliminated enemy agents, and protected national security for decades." "By turning children into unconscious weapons," Rachel replied. "By stealing their ability to make choices about their own lives. By creating the most effective intelligence operatives in human history," Kellerman shot back. "Every branded individual has served with distinction. Your psychological conditioning made you better soldiers, better leaders, better Americans." Rachel felt a surge of the old anger, the same rage that had driven her through combat deployments and dangerous missions. But now she understood where that anger really came from. It wasn't natural aggression or patriotic fervor. It was manufactured fury, carefully cultivated and directed by people who saw her as nothing more than a biological machine. They reached what appeared to be a service elevator shaft. The elevator car itself was long gone, but the shaft provided access to the upper levels of the abandoned psychiatric building. "Riley, what's your position?" Rachel spoke into the radio. "I've relocated to the north side. The explosion bought us some time, but they're conducting a systematic search. You need to move fast." Using cable from abandoned medical equipment, they fashioned a rope system that allowed them to climb up the elevator shaft. Dr. Kellerman protested that she was too old for such physical exertion, but Rachel wasn't interested in her comfort. The psychiatric wing was a maze of empty rooms and dark corridors, but Martinez seemed to know where she was going. She led them through what had once been patient wards toward what she indicated was an emergency exit on the building's far side. "How do you know this building so well?" Rachel asked. "Because this is where they brought the subjects who couldn't be successfully conditioned. This is where they kept the failures." The implications of that statement hit Rachel like a physical blow. How many children were experimented on who didn't make it into the program? According to Foster's research, for every successful subject like you, there were 4 or 5 who suffered complete psychological breaks during the conditioning process. Some were institutionalized, others simply disappeared from the record. They reached a heavy door marked with radiation warning symbols and biohazard notices. Martinez produced a key card from her medical bag. Apparently, her preparation for this mission had been extensive. The door opened onto a loading dock behind the psychiatric building. The area was dark and appeared to be unmonitored, but Rachel's training told her that appearances could be deceiving.
Riley, we're at the north loading dock of the psychiatric wing. What's your visual on hostile positions? I count 6 operators maintaining a perimeter around the main hospital building. Looks like they haven't realized you're in the secondary structure yet. As they prepared to move across the open ground between buildings, Dr. Kellerman made one final attempt to justify the project. The children we selected were already exceptional. We simply helped them reach their full potential. Without our intervention, most of them would have led ordinary, unremarkable lives. Instead, they became heroes. Rachel turned to face the woman who had shaped her entire existence. We became victims. You took away our right to choose who we wanted to be. And look what you became instead, Kellerman replied. A decorated soldier, a leader, someone who made a difference in the world. Would you really have preferred a normal life? The question hung in the air as Rachel considered everything she'd accomplished during her military career. The missions she'd completed, the lives she'd saved, the sense of purpose that had driven her for decades. All of it had been built on a foundation of psychological manipulation. But as she thought about the question, she realized something that Dr. Kellerman had never understood. The conditioning hadn't created her strengths, it had only directed them. The courage, intelligence, and determination that made her an effective soldier were her own qualities, qualities that would have emerged regardless of the project's interference. Yes, Rachel said finally, I would have preferred the chance to choose my own path, even if it led to a completely ordinary life. Martinez was monitoring radio chatter on a device that looked like a modified military scanner. They've discovered the tunnel. We've got maybe 5 minutes before they track us to this location. A vehicle approached from the darkness, not one of the black SUVs, but a civilian pickup truck with Captain Riley behind the wheel. Time to go, Riley said as they climbed into the truck bed with Dr. Kellerman. I've got a safe house about an hour from here, and Martinez has arranged for a congressional aide to meet us there. As they drove away from Riverside Children's Hospital, Rachel watched the building disappear behind them. The place where her childhood had ended and her conditioning had begun would always be part of her history, but it no longer controlled her future. What happens now? She asked Martinez. Now we expose everything. Foster's research, the deprogramming techniques, the full list of branded individuals, and the government officials who knew about the project. It's going to destroy careers and probably bring down several administrations, but it's the only way to make sure this never happens again. Dr. Kellerman spoke from her corner of the truck bed. You think exposing this will end it, but there are things about the Meridian Project you still don't understand, things that go deeper than childhood conditioning and psychological manipulation. Such as? The project was never about creating better soldiers. It was about creating a specific type of person for a specific purpose, and that purpose is about to become very clear to the world. Rachel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. What are you talking about? In 3 days, there's going to be a terrorist attack on American soil, an attack that will require exactly the kind of response that branded individuals are uniquely qualified to provide. The Meridian Project wasn't designed to serve the government, it was designed to control it. As Riley's truck disappeared into the Ohio countryside, carrying the truth about one of the most extensive human experimentation programs in American history, Rachel realized that their escape from the hospital was only the beginning. The real battle for their freedom and for the future of the country was just starting. What happens now? She asked Martinez. Now we expose everything. Foster's research, the deprogramming techniques, the full list of branded individuals, and the government officials who knew about the project. It's going to destroy careers and probably bring down several administrations, but it's the only way to make sure this never happens again. Dr. Kellerman spoke from her corner of the truck bed. You think exposing this will end it, but there are things about the Meridian Project you still don't understand. Things that go deeper than childhood conditioning and psychological manipulation. Such as? The project was never about creating better soldiers. It was about creating a specific type of person for a specific purpose, and that purpose is about to become very clear to the world. Rachel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. What are you talking about? In 3 days, there's going to be a terrorist attack on American soil, an attack that will require exactly the kind of response that branded individuals are uniquely qualified to provide. The Meridian Project wasn't designed to serve the government, it was designed to control it. As Riley's truck disappeared into the Ohio countryside, carrying the truth about one of the most extensive human experimentation programs in American history, Rachel realized that their escape from the hospital was only the beginning. The real battle for their freedom and for the future of the country was just starting. The safe house turned out to be a converted farmhouse outside Columbus, surrounded by enough open land to make surveillance difficult, but close enough to the city for quick access to transportation networks. As they pulled into the gravel driveway, Rachel noticed at least 3 other vehicles already parked near the house. This wasn't just a meeting, it was a full operational briefing. Inside, she found herself face to face with people she'd only heard about in whispered conversations. There was Congressman Michael Stevens, chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, along with FBI Deputy Director Sarah Walsh, and a woman introduced only as Dr. Foster's colleague from the Institute. But it was the other people in the room that made her breath catch. 3 individuals she recognized from old military files, branded subjects who'd supposedly died in training accidents or combat operations years ago. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, the first said, extending her hand, officially killed in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan in 2019. Actually extracted by Dr. Foster's network when we discovered I was being prepared for a domestic assassination mission. The second stepped forward. Lieutenant Colonel David Park supposedly died in a vehicle bombing in Iraq in 2017. Reality is, I started remembering things I wasn't supposed to remember, and Foster's people got me out before the cleanup team arrived. The third was someone Rachel recognized immediately, Master Sergeant Jennifer Cole. We served together in Syria. You died in that IED attack, Rachel said, confusion evident in her voice. No, you were conditioned to believe I died in that attack. I was actually extracted because my psychological conditioning was breaking down. The explosion was real, but I was pulled out during the chaos and replaced with a body that was too damaged for positive identification. Dr. Martinez began setting up a laptop and projector, while the others took seats around what appeared to be a tactical planning table. What we're about to show you represents 18 months of investigation into the true scope of the Meridian Project. Rachel, what Dr. Kellerman told you about a terrorist attack was true, but the situation is even more complex than she indicated. The first image that appeared on screen was a network diagram showing connections between branded individuals and their current positions throughout the government, military, and intelligence community. The scope was staggering. Subjects were placed in critical roles, from the Pentagon to the CIA to Homeland Security. 47 branded individuals are currently in positions where they could influence or control the government's response to a major crisis, Congressman Stevens explained. Most of them have no conscious awareness of their conditioning, but they can be activated remotely using specific trigger protocols.
FBI Deputy Director Walsh pulled up a second screen showing intercepts of encrypted communications. 3 days ago, we detected unusual activity on networks associated with Meridian Holdings. Code phrases and activation sequences were transmitted to cell phones belonging to 19 high-ranking officials in Washington. Rachel studied the list of names. Several were people she'd met during her career, including a colonel who'd fast-tracked her promotions and a CIA analyst who'd recruited her for joint operations. You're saying they're all branded? Or they're handlers working with branded individuals, Dr. Martinez replied. The project created a support network of non-conditioned personnel who help manage and direct the branded subjects without understanding the true nature of what they're doing. Master Sergeant Cole activated a third display showing satellite imagery of major American cities. The terrorist attack Dr. Kellerman mentioned is designed to trigger a very specific response. Based on our analysis of activation patterns, the attack will occur simultaneously in New York, Washington, and Los Angeles. What kind of attack? Chemical weapons deployed in subway systems during rush hour, Congressman Stevens said grimly. The casualties will be massive.
The panic will be overwhelming, and the government's response will require exactly the kind of coordinated intelligence and security operations that branded individuals excel at. Lieutenant Colonel Park leaned forward. But here's the real problem. The terrorist attack is being orchestrated by the Meridian Project itself. They're creating the crisis they've spent 30 years preparing to manage. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Rachel felt sick as she realized the true scope of what they were facing. "It's a coup," she said quietly. "Not exactly a coup in the traditional sense," Dr. Foster's colleague said, speaking for the first time. "It's something more subtle and more dangerous. They're creating a crisis that will allow branded individuals to assume emergency powers and coordinate the government's response. Once they're in control of the crisis response, they'll be positioned to influence long-term policy decisions." Dr. Martinez pulled up financial records showing the flow of money through shell companies and defense contractors. The Meridian Project has spent billions of dollars over 3 decades, but the funding doesn't come from any official government budget. This is being financed by private interests, defense contractors, pharmaceutical companies, and what appears to be foreign intelligence services. "Foreign intelligence?" Rachel asked. "We believe the project was originally a joint operation between American defense contractors and certain elements within foreign governments who wanted to influence U.S. policy decisions. The conditioning was designed to create American officials who would make decisions that benefit foreign economic and strategic interests." FBI Deputy Director Walsh showed them intercepted communications between Meridian Holdings and companies in several countries. "We've traced funding sources to defense contractors in Germany, pharmaceutical companies in Switzerland, and what appears to be front companies for Chinese intelligence operations." The scope of the betrayal was staggering. Rachel had spent her entire military career believing she was serving American interests, only to discover that her conditioning had been designed to make her serve foreign powers. "How many people know about this?" she asked. "Outside this room, maybe a dozen others," Congressman Stevens replied. "We've had to be extremely careful about who we trust. For all we know, there are branded individuals or handlers throughout the investigation apparatus." Dr. Kellerman, who had been sitting quietly in the corner under guard, finally spoke up. "You still don't understand the beauty of what we created. The branded individuals aren't traitors. They genuinely believe they're serving their country. The conditioning doesn't make them disloyal. It simply adjusts their perception of what loyalty means." "Explain that," Rachel demanded. "A branded individual will always choose what they believe is best for America. But their understanding of what's best for America has been subtly shaped by their conditioning. They'll support policies that increase defense spending, expand intelligence operations, and strengthen ties with certain foreign allies, all while believing these choices represent patriotic duty." Staff Sergeant Santos stood up abruptly. "That's exactly what happened to me. I was tasked with assassinating a senator who was investigating defense contractor fraud. The mission briefings convinced me he was a security risk, that his investigation would damage national security. I was completely prepared to kill an American official because I believed it was the right thing." "How did you break free from the conditioning?" Rachel asked. "Pain," Santos replied. "Dr. Foster's deprogramming process involves systematically breaking down the psychological barriers that prevent you from seeing your true memories. It's like performing surgery on your own mind without anesthesia." Dr. Foster's colleague activated a new presentation showing brain scans and psychological assessment data. "The conditioning process involves implanting false memory constructs and emotional triggers that override critical thinking about certain topics. Breaking free requires the subject to consciously confront and reject beliefs they've held since childhood. 3 of the subjects who attempted deprogramming died from the psychological trauma," Lieutenant Colonel Park added. "Their minds couldn't handle the reality of what had been done to them."
Rachel looked around the room at the faces of people who'd undergone this process and survived. They all carried a haunted expression, the look of people who'd discovered that their entire understanding of reality had been artificially constructed.
"What's the plan to stop the terrorist attack?" she asked. Congressman Stevens pulled up a tactical map showing the locations of the planned chemical weapons deployment. "We have 48 hours to prevent the attacks and expose the Meridian Project. The problem is that most of the officials with the authority to stop this are either branded themselves or are working with handlers. We need to reach the non-conditioned officials and convince them to take action based on our intelligence," FBI Deputy Director Walsh said. "But we also need to be prepared for the possibility that we'll be branded as traitors or terrorists ourselves." Dr. Martinez showed them a list of emergency protocols. "If we can't prevent the attacks through official channels, we'll need to take direct action. That means infiltrating the attack sites and neutralizing the chemical weapons before they can be deployed. Infiltrating the sites means going up against the same people who conditioned us," Master Sergeant Cole noted. "They'll know our psychological profiles, our tactical preferences, our weaknesses." "But they won't know that we've broken free from our conditioning," Rachel replied. "That gives us an advantage they won't be expecting." Dr. Kellerman laughed bitterly from her corner. "You think breaking free from your conditioning makes you stronger? But you're wrong. The conditioning didn't just control your behavior, it enhanced your capabilities. Without it, you're just ordinary soldiers facing extraordinary threats." "Maybe," Rachel said, "but ordinary soldiers with free will are more dangerous than enhanced soldiers operating under someone else's control." Congressman Stevens checked his watch. "We have 18 hours before the first phase of the operation begins. FBI Deputy Director Walsh will coordinate with trusted elements within the Bureau to investigate the attack sites. Dr. Martinez will work on identifying and deprogramming as many branded officials as possible before the activation protocols take full effect." "What about the rest of us?" Rachel asked. "You're going back into the field," Stevens replied. "But this time, you'll be fighting for something you actually chose to believe in." As the meeting broke up and teams began forming for different aspects of the mission, Rachel found herself wondering if they were already too late. 30 years of planning and conditioning couldn't be undone in 2 days, and the Meridian Project had resources and positioning they were only beginning to understand. But for the first time since her discharge from the military, Rachel felt like she was fighting for something that truly mattered. Not because she'd been conditioned to believe it mattered, but because she'd chosen to make it matter. The battle for control of the American government was about to begin, and the outcome would determine whether the country remain a democracy or become a puppet state, controlled by foreign interests operating through psychologically conditioned sleeper agents. As Rachel prepared for what might be her final mission, she realized that everything she'd learned about courage, sacrifice, and duty during her military career was about to be put to the ultimate test. The only difference was that this time she was fighting by choice rather than by programming. And that choice, she knew, would make all the difference. The emergency session of Congress convened at 3:47 a.m., just 14 hours before the planned chemical attacks. Rachel stood in the gallery watching as Congressman Stevens presented evidence that would have seemed like science fiction just a week earlier. Below, she could see several officials whose names had appeared on the branded individuals list, their faces carefully neutral as they listened to testimony about their own psychological conditioning. FBI Deputy Director Walsh had worked through the night, and her teams had successfully located 2 of the 3 chemical weapons caches. The New York device had been found in a maintenance tunnel beneath Grand Central Station, while the Los Angeles weapon was discovered in a storage facility near Union Station. But the Washington, D.C. device remained missing, and intelligence suggested it was already in position for deployment. Dr. Martinez sat beside Rachel, monitoring a tablet that showed the real-time psychological status of branded individuals throughout the government. The activation signals had been transmitted 18 hours earlier, but the deprogramming protocols they developed were showing mixed results. 12 subjects have successfully broken free from their conditioning, Martinez whispered.
But 7 others are showing signs of complete psychological breakdown, and we haven't been able to reach the remaining 28 branded individuals at all. On the floor of Congress, Senator Patricia Hawkins, a name Rachel recognized from the branded list, was questioning the validity of the evidence being presented. Congressman Stevens, you're asking us to believe that dozens of our colleagues and military officers have been subjected to mind control techniques that sound like something from a Cold War thriller. Where's the concrete proof that any of this is real? Stevens nodded to his aide, who activated a large display screen. The image that appeared showed brain scans comparing normal neural activity to the distinctive patterns found in branded individuals. Senator Hawkins, these neurological scans were taken from voluntary subjects who underwent Dr. Foster's deprogramming process. The evidence shows clear structural changes in brain regions associated with memory formation and decision-making processes. Rachel watched Senator Hawkins' face carefully as the brain scans were displayed. For just a moment, she saw something flicker across the woman's expression. Recognition, perhaps, or fear. Then the senator's features returned to their previous neutral mask. Even if we accept these scans as legitimate, Congressman Stevens, you haven't provided any proof that foreign intelligence services are involved in this alleged project. That was Dr. Martinez's cue. She stood up in the gallery and walked to the microphone that had been set up for expert testimony. Senator Hawkins, 3 hours ago, we intercepted communications between Meridian Holdings and known Chinese intelligence operatives. The messages contained final deployment instructions for what they called Phase 4 of their operation. Martinez displayed the intercepted communications on the main screen. The messages were in code, but the timestamps and recipient lists made their meaning clear enough. Phase 4 involves the activation of all remaining branded individuals to assume emergency leadership roles following the chemical attacks. Based on our analysis, the goal is to position conditioned personnel in charge of the federal response to the crisis.
Senator Hawkins stood up abruptly. This entire proceeding is based on speculation and paranoid conspiracy theories. I motion to suspend this session until proper verification of these claims can be conducted through normal intelligence channels. Congressman Stevens looked directly at the senator. Senator Hawkins, according to our records, you attended Camp Wilderness from 1989 to 1991, and you underwent an appendectomy at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia in 1987. Would you be willing to submit to a medical examination to verify whether you have any unusual markings on your spine? The chamber fell completely silent. Senator Hawkins' face had gone pale, and for the first time, her carefully controlled composure began to crack. That's a violation of privacy. You have no right to demand access to my medical records or to subject me to physical examination based on these absurd allegations. Senator, Stevens said gently, we're not demanding anything. We're simply asking if you're willing to help us verify the truth of these claims. Rachel could see the internal struggle playing out on the senator's face. Part of her was fighting to maintain the conditioning that had controlled her for decades, while another part was beginning to recognize the truth of what was being revealed. Master Sergeant Cole, who had been positioned near one of the exits, spoke into a concealed radio. We have movement in the DC Metro tunnels, multiple vehicles converging on Union Station. The final chemical weapon was about to be deployed. FBI Deputy Director Walsh stood up from her position on the floor. Congressman Stevens, we need to suspend this session. We have confirmation that the Washington attack is imminent. But before Stevens could respond, Senator Hawkins moved toward one of the chamber's emergency exits. Her movement was too purposeful, too coordinated to be a simple attempt to leave the building. Rachel's training kicked in immediately. She's been activated, she called out to Cole. The congressional testimony triggered her emergency protocols. What happened next unfolded with terrifying precision. Senator Hawkins produced a concealed weapon, a small pistol that had somehow passed through security screening, and aimed it directly at Congressman Stevens. The Meridian Project will not be stopped by a handful of traitors and foreign agitators, she said, her voice carrying the mechanical quality Rachel recognized from her own experience with conditioning.
Rachel vaulted over the gallery railing, using skills that were her own rather than products of conditioning. As she dropped toward the chamber floor, she could see other branded individuals throughout the room beginning to respond to whatever activation signal Senator Hawkins represented. The chamber erupted into chaos. Security personnel moved to protect members of Congress, but they were facing opponents who had been trained in the same tactics they used. Worse, some of the security team might themselves be branded individuals responding to the same activation protocols. Rachel tackled Senator Hawkins just as the woman fired her first shot. The bullet went wide, embedding itself in the wooden paneling behind the speaker's podium. As they struggled for control of the weapon, Rachel could hear similar conflicts breaking out throughout the chamber. "Senator, listen to me," Rachel said, trying to reach whatever remained of the woman's conscious mind. "I know exactly what I'm doing," Hawkins replied, but her voice carried the same hollow quality Rachel remembered from her own conditioning. "I'm protecting American interests from foreign infiltration." "You're serving foreign infiltration," Rachel shot back. "The people who conditioned you are working for Chinese intelligence. Everything you think you're fighting for is actually helping them control our government." For a moment, uncertainty flickered across the senator's features. The conditioning had programmed her to be patriotic, but it had also programmed her to see the deprogrammed individuals as threats to national security. The contradiction created a brief opening in her psychological defenses. Rachel pressed her advantage. "Senator, when you were at Camp Wilderness, do you remember the counselors asking you about your family's political beliefs? Do you remember the sessions where they showed you images and asked you to rate your emotional responses?" Those were just psychology exercises, educational assessments. They were conditioning sessions designed to identify your core beliefs so they could be redirected. "Senator, you've spent your entire political career supporting policies that benefit foreign interests while believing you were being patriotic." The weapon in Senator Hawkins' hand began to waver. The cognitive dissonance between her conditioning and the evidence of her own memories was creating cracks in the psychological architecture that had controlled her for decades. But before the senator could fully break free, a new voice cut through the chaos in the chamber. "All branded assets implement termination protocol Zulu. Eliminate all witnesses to classified operations." The voice belonged to Dr. Kellerman, who had somehow escaped from custody and was speaking through the chamber's public address system. Rachel felt a familiar pressure in her mind, not the overwhelming compulsion she'd experienced in the hospital basement, but an echo of the conditioning trying to reassert itself. Around the chamber, she could see other branded individuals straightening up with renewed purpose. "The termination protocol overrides all other programming," Martinez called out from the gallery. "It's designed to make subjects eliminate anyone who threatens the project, even if it means their own destruction." Rachel watched in horror as Senator Hawkins raised her weapon again, this time pointing it at her own temple. The termination protocol wasn't just about killing witnesses. It was about ensuring that branded individuals would die rather than be captured and deprogrammed. "Senator, don't let them win," Rachel said urgently. "Your life belongs to you, not to them. You have the right to choose what happens next." I don't know how to choose," Hawkins whispered. "Every thought I have feels like it came from somewhere else." "Then start with something simple," Rachel replied. "Choose to put the gun down. Choose to take one more breath. Choose to find out who you really are underneath all the conditioning." Senator Hawkins looked at the weapon in her hand, then at Rachel, then at the chaos unfolding throughout the chamber. Slowly, she lowered the pistol. I choose to live," she said quietly. "And I choose to help you stop this." Dr. Kellerman's voice came through the speakers again, but this time it carried a note of desperation. "Phase 4 assets who fail to complete termination protocols will be eliminated by backup systems. You have 30 seconds to comply." Rachel realized what that meant just as the chamber's fire suppression system activated. But instead of releasing water or foam, the system began dispensing what appeared to be an aerosol chemical agent. "Everyone out!" FBI Deputy Director Walsh shouted. "The building's been weaponized." The evacuation that followed was unlike anything in congressional history. Members of Congress, staff, and security personnel fled the chamber while wearing whatever makeshift protection they could find. Several branded individuals who'd been activated by the termination protocol remained behind, apparently willing to die rather than abandon their final mission. As Rachel helped Senator Hawkins reach the building's exit, her phone buzzed with a message from Master Sergeant Cole. "DC chemical weapon neutralized, Union Station secured. All 3 attack sites are clear." Outside the Capitol building, emergency medical teams were treating people for chemical exposure, while FBI teams secured the perimeter. But Rachel knew the immediate crisis was only the beginning of a much larger reckoning. Over the following months, the full scope of the Meridian Project slowly came to light. Congressional investigations revealed that the program had influenced American policy decisions for over 2 decades. Foreign intelligence services had effectively controlled aspects of U.S. military and intelligence operations through their network of conditioned assets. 23 branded individuals, including Senator Hawkins, underwent successful deprogramming. 12 others died during the process, unable to psychologically survive the revelation of their true circumstances. The remaining subjects simply disappeared, apparently extracted by Meridian operatives before they could be reached. Dr. Kellerman was found dead in a secure facility 3 days after the congressional hearing, apparently having activated her own termination protocol rather than face prosecution for crimes against humanity. For Rachel, the end of the Meridian Project marked the beginning of a different kind of life. Without the psychological conditioning that had driven her for decades, she had to learn who she really was and what she genuinely wanted to do with her freedom. She chose to work with Dr. Martinez, helping to identify and deprogram other victims of similar psychological manipulation programs. It wasn't the heroic military career she'd been conditioned to pursue, but it was meaningful work that she'd chosen for herself. The brand on her spine would always be there, a permanent reminder of what had been done to her. But it no longer controlled her future. For the first time in her life, that future belonged entirely to her. And that, Rachel realized, was worth more than any mission she'd ever completed while under someone else's control. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.